A sorcerer is someone who, through discipline and saving energy, is able to perceive more than the everyday world. Do we always understand what is happening to us? Certainly not. Often, we surrender to a sense of hopelessness and feel like victims of circumstances. But can we prevail in the struggle with constant problems? Absolutely yes. It is our very nature to take charge of our own lives. And how can we do this? Through the accumulation of personal power and the ability to think magically. Carlos Castaneda is a mysterious writer who revealed to the wider public the secret teaching of the Toltecs, passed on to him by his Indian teacher, Don Juan. This teaching can guide anyone who comes into contact with it to think in specific categories that go beyond everyday perception, leading to the accumulation of personal power and the attainment of complete control over life's circumstances. Castaneda called this way of thinking magical thinking. Magical thinking prepares a person for an incredibly practical method of deep transformation of personality and character, which Castaneda called the path of the warrior. The path of the warrior consists of 4 steps of physical and spiritual evolution, namely the man of everyday life, the apprentice, the warrior, and the man of knowledge. Magical thinking and the path of the warrior return to everyone the ability to govern their own life and the freedom from the pressure of circumstances, making life reasonable and strong. To develop magical thinking and step onto the path of the warrior is possible for anyone, regardless of circumstances. Let's not waste a single second and examine each of the 4 steps of the path of the warrior to learn how to think magically. The first step is called the man of everyday life. It's important to understand that this does not refer to a human as a biological species or a specific individual. It refers to a person with an ingrained way of thinking developed in their consciousness through upbringing and socialization shaped by purely everyday ideas of daily life. An ordinary person is usually the bearer of this type of thinking, which makes them a man of everyday life. To illustrate what this means, imagine that you are standing by a window, looking out at a picturesque landscape beyond it. You raise your hand holding a glass of water and view the scene not directly, but through the glass. The perceived quality of the landscape outside depends on how clear the water in your glass is. The murkier the water, the more distorted your view of the world becomes. In this analogy, the glass represents the person. The water represents their way of thinking. It follows that the distortions through which you perceive yourself and the world around you can be removed if you get rid of the thinking that causes them. You surely won't deny that it is within your power to fill the glass with clearer, purer water. Constantly cleansing your inner contents is the path of the warrior. Understanding the need for this and believing in the possibility of purification is the essence of magical thinking. In contrast to the strong and developed qualities of the warrior, the world of the man of everyday life, due to their mundane way of thinking, is shaped by entrenched character tendencies and physical states such as manipulation, self-criticism, exhaustion, irresponsibility, indifference, and a sense of loneliness. Among this diversity of traits, which weaken the personality of the person of everyday life and spoil their character, Carlos Castaneda highlights 3 main ones: idleness, laziness, and the need to gratify one's sense of self-importance. It is precisely the sense of self-importance that forms the destructive core of mundane thinking, causing the man of everyday life to become exhausted and ignore their energetic nature. Magical thinking on the path of the warrior leads to the realization that a person is a dual being, consisting of physical and energetic bodies, united by the power of human perception. Unfortunately, in mundane thinking, the idea that a person is solely a physical body dominates. As a result, the dual nature remains largely hidden from our ordinary perception. This happens because the sense of self-importance paralyzes the ability to think in abstract categories. Castaneda wrote that every person is first and foremost a magical being, whose task is to understand their own dual nature. Knowledge of this dual nature forms the foundation of magical thinking. This type of thinking requires a large reserve of energy, yet the sense of self-importance consumes almost all the energy available to create a personal story that maintains the illusion of false uniqueness in our consciousness. When we are trapped in mundane thinking, we cease to be truly unique. Weakened and energetically depleted, we lose the ability to think magically. Without magical thinking, the path of evolution for body and spirit, which is the path of the warrior, is closed to us. Therefore, the primary task of any person is to free themselves from the sense of self-importance. Carlos Castaneda, in his books, describes a person as an energetic shell consisting of two halves, the tonal and the nagual. The tonal, according to Castaneda, is the part of a person's energetic shell that is used to interact with and perceive the world of ordinary things. The nagual is the second part of the energetic cocoon, hidden beneath the veil of everyday life, containing the enormous and untapped potential of a person as an energetic being. Castaneda explains that the tonal is trapped in rationalism. Rationalism cannot perceive the abstract and therefore turns us into rigid materialists with grounded, mundane thinking. We begin to believe that the world is nothing more than a collection of physical forms. Mundane thinking ignores the nagual because it cannot comprehend it. Without connection to the nagual, the tonal becomes weak. Through a weak tonal, energy flows out of our life. The ideas and categories of thought with which a weak tonal interacts often become confused and even contradictory. Thus, a weak tonal is also disorderly. Where there is no order, feelings of doom, exhaustion, and a lack of inner strength emerge. Just as a river needs a clear bed and strong banks to flow freely, energy requires a strong tonal that interacts with the nagual. Through magical thinking, a person strengthens the tonal. So, we have established that on the path of the warrior, the first step, called the man of everyday life, refers to a person captured by mundane thinking. This thinking is characterized by strict rationalism and disorder. Mundane thinking makes a person vulnerable to the sense of self-importance and causes exhaustion. Friends, if you want to learn even more about why it is necessary to let go of mundane thinking and how to start doing it gradually and carefully, write to us in the comments under the video. We will prepare clear and understandable learning material for you with both theory and practice. Of course, when working with new ideas, it is necessary to interact with those for whom such ideas have become part of their lives, but such people may not be around. By the way, for this purpose, we created the Three Suns Closed Club, in which, together with the participants, we touch upon the unknown sides of both the spiritual nature of man and the unsolved mysteries of the world and the cosmos. It is the Three Suns Closed Club that helps to find like-minded people and begin to perceive the world better, clearer, and deeper. In the Closed Club, we publish all necessary information, links to films, books, scientific articles, etc. that will help you to get personal enlightenment. In case you want to join us in the Three Suns Closed Club and learn to perceive new ideas and begin to develop magical thinking that will enrich your life, we will leave a link in the description of the video. The next step on the path of the warrior is the apprentice. The apprentice clearly sees and understands that ordinary categories of thinking are no longer sufficient to unlock their inner potential. They face the necessity of gradually and deeply transforming their tonal in order. Through magical thinking and an ordered tonal, the apprentice accumulates energy. A strong tonal protects against the troubles and chaos characteristic of the being of the man of everyday life and serves as the gateway into the unknown of the Nagual. The process of strengthening the tonal is called by Castaneda bringing the tonal into order or accumulating personal power. The accumulation of personal power is based on two indispensable conditions of human life: good physical health and a strong intellect. Don Juan stressed in every way possible, while imparting his instruction, the fact that the enormous emphasis the shamans of his lineage put on physical prowess and mental well-being had lasted to the present day. I was able to corroborate the truth of his statements by observing him and his 15 sorcerer companions. The superb physical condition that Don Juan had steadily advocated from the first day of our association was, by all indications, the first step toward the redeployment of our inherent energy. A healthy body provides a person with the necessary amount of energy, which is then spent on fighting diseases. A strong intellect is essential for a warrior in order to learn how to work with abstract categories and make them part of their new magical way of thinking. These categories are the universe, energy, power, morality, and faith. When facing problems in daily life, in relationships, or at work, you rely on a strong tonal and begin to think in deep categories of the laws by which nature lives. This allows you to free yourself from panic, self-pity, and to see the current situation in its entirety. You begin to perceive the previously invisible connections between things in the world. When you see the world and the essence of things within it, you win any battle. The man of everyday life has a weak tonal, not because they face problems every day, get tired, and do not know how to live. Rather, they get tired and feel doomed precisely because their tonal is weak. To strengthen the tonal and make it right, one must learn to think magically. Carlos Castaneda writes that the most important technique that strengthens the tonal is the stopping of the internal dialogue. In its simplest sense, stopping the internal dialogue means putting an end to the everyday way of thinking, which flows chaotically in the mind of the man of daily life, like a turbulent and muddy river. The apprentice stops the internal dialogue through the technique of erasing personal history, which is based on freeing oneself from self-importance, accepting responsibility for one's life, and accepting death as an advisor. Erasing personal history does not mean asceticism nor lying to others. This technique means that you stop complaining and making claims against yourself and the world, as well as stop referring to shared past experiences with specific people. You change, and therefore no one on this earth should hold on to the perception of your past. Freeing oneself from self-importance is in itself one of the greatest challenges for the apprentice and a technique of deep transformation of thinking. It relies on control, a sense of timing, discipline, endurance, will, and interaction with the petty tyrant. Each of these notions requires careful study, and the energy for this work is gathered by the apprentice through order in life and magical thinking. Accepting responsibility for one's life allows the apprentice to free themselves from the belief that they are a victim of circumstances, a leaf given to the power of the wind. By accepting responsibility, we learn to be strong. Accepting death as an advisor means a deep understanding that you, like the world around you, are not only a form, but also a certain force behind this form, which is the force that animates it. The life and oscillations of this force do not end with chemical dissolution and the physical death of the form. Walking further along the path of the warrior, the apprentice becomes a warrior or a sorcerer. The warrior restores within himself the natural duality of the tonal and the Nagual. The warrior's world is a world of will. Castaneda explains will as the energy that is released through the development of attention. Will is governed by intent. Knowledge of intent is available to everyone, but mastery of intent is revealed only to those who explore it. This means that will and intent are cultivated in a person through learning to think magically and to see the world not only as form, but also as energy. Don Juan taught Castaneda that on his path of the warrior, a sorcerer relies on high moral standards, virtue, and a sense of beauty. The real challenge for those sorcerer-seers was finding a system of behavior that was neither petty nor capricious, but that combine the morality and the sense of beauty which differentiates sorcerer-seers from plain witches. Sorcerer can do all kinds of good and bad things to his fellow men. The quest of sorcerer-seers is to go beyond that stand, and to do that they need morality and beauty. Thanks to high morality and a sense of beauty, the sorcerer masters the technique of dreaming to stop the internal dialogue. This technique has nothing to do with the desire to travel through colorful dreams or to escape reality. According to Castaneda, dreaming is an auxiliary technique that teaches the warrior's tonal to step aside. Therefore, seeing the world magically through the veil of the tonal is an act of will, requiring a great deal of energy. The ordinary person, because of mundane thinking, damages their body, weakens their intellect, lives in disorder, and thus constantly loses energy and diminishes their will. Therefore, to master dreaming, one must stop thinking like an ordinary person and begin to bring their life into order through magical thinking. The practice of dreaming relies on disrupting the routine of life, the gate of power, and not doing. Each of these techniques is an example of deep thought, sound judgment, and sobriety, qualities with which the warrior continues to live in society while fulfilling the responsibilities they have undertaken. Taking the next step on the path of the warrior, the sorcerer becomes a man of knowledge. The man of knowledge reveals unity with the world and transcends the limitations of his human energy cocoon. Having restored the harmony of the tonal and the Nagual, the man of knowledge merges through perception with the flows of energy that run through the universe, recognizing himself as an inseparable part of them. This process in Carlos Castaneda's books is called the fire from within. At the moment of the fire from within, the man of knowledge experiences the dissolution of his energy cocoon and begins to see the world as it truly is, an eternal flow of energies. From that moment on, the man of knowledge interacts with the world through mind, emotions, will, and seeing. He does not flee from people, nor does he neglect the social responsibilities he has undertaken. The man of knowledge engages with his surroundings in a new way, which is called controlled folly. By gaining vision and wholeness through the interaction of the tonal and the Nagual, the man of knowledge lives in the world of reality. He sees that all energy flowing through the universe comes from a single source. He feels his unity and kinship with this source through the spirit. The man of knowledge perceives that the spirit connects him with every person on this earth. Through this unity, the man of knowledge attains freedom and listens, thanks to the spirit, to the legend of eternity. A person is not weak because it is their nature or even their destiny. They are weak because they have not yet learned to think, above all, to think magically. Magical thinking leads one to the path of the warrior. The path of the warrior is the path of peace and liberation from one's own folly. Through magical thinking, a person acquires noble and strong qualities, strengthens the body's health, develops the intellect, awakens their feelings, and trains their will. This is how we make our lives wise and strong and become men of knowledge. This is how we move toward the freedom of the spirit, coming into contact with eternity.